Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into Reconstruction, that critical period right after the American Civil War. And we're focusing on a really big question. What is freedom? What did it mean then?
That's the core of it. We're using Chapter 15 of Eric Foner's Give Me Liberty as our guide, basically walking through 1865 to 1877. We want to understand how different groups, former slaves, white Southerners, the federal government, saw freedom.
They didn't all see it the same way, did they?
Not at all. These visions clashed, sometimes violently, and that struggle really reshaped America.
So by the end of this deep dive, you, the listener, should have a solid grasp of the key players, the big events, the crucial ideas, and why this period, well, why it still matters so much today. Okay, let's dive in. The war's over, slavery's abolished, the nation's just shattered. What does freedom even look like in that moment for different people?
Well, let's start with the former slaves. Their idea of freedom, it came directly from their experience of not being free. Take Garrison Frazier, a Baptist minister in Savannah. In 1865, he basically defined slavery as someone taking your labor by force, without your consent. So freedom, for him, was simple. Placing us where we could reap the fruit of our own labor and take care of ourselves.
Makes sense. Control over your own work.
Exactly. And for many, that meant landownership. It was absolutely central to their vision.
And what were their immediate priorities? I mean, day one of freedom.
Family. First and foremost, reconnecting families torn apart by slavery. Foner mentions a man walking over 600 miles searching for his wife and kids. Just imagine.
Wow.
And black women often withdrew from field labor. That was a huge shift, choosing to focus on their own families, their own homes.
A reclaiming of the domestic sphere, in a way.
Precisely. Then came community building. Independent black churches just exploded like the first African church in Richmond. These weren't just for worship.
Right, they became community center.
Totally. Schools, social events, political meetings. Black ministers often became really important political leaders.
And education itself was a huge deal, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A real thirst for learning, Foner calls it. Young, old, everyone wanted to learn. To read the Bible, yes, but also to navigate the economy, to participate in politics.
That's when we see the first black colleges established, like Fisk, Hampton, Howard.
Exactly, laying foundations. There's this image, Foner includes, mother and daughter reading, which just perfectly captures that desire. 2 generations absorbed in a book. It's powerful.
And political rights. The vote.
Absolutely central. Frederick Douglass put it plainly. Slavery is not abolished until the black man has the ballot. Without it, you still had this stigma of inferiority.
So they embraced political life, celebrating the 4th of July when many white Southerners wouldn't.
Yeah, for years, it showed their claim to American identity. And underpinning all this, again, was land. The belief that their unpaid labor had earned them a right to the land. It was essential for truly independent communities.
So their vision of freedom was much broader than just not being enslaved.
It was an open-ended process, as Foner says, a complete transformation of their lives and the society around them. It had elements similar to white definitions, family, religion, politics, but the starting point and the scope were just radically different.
Okay, let's flip the coin. What about the white Southern planters? How did they see freedom after losing the war and, well, their entire labor system?
Well, their first reaction was, frankly, dismay, utter devastation. Economically, the South was wrecked. Property values crashed, even excluding the value of slaves. Many planters lost everything.
So they weren't exactly embracing change.
Not even close. Most struggled, really struggled, to accept emancipation. They couldn't grasp that freedom for black people meant the same thing as freedom for them. Their definition of black freedom was incredibly narrow.
Trying to keep things as close to slavery as possible.
Exactly. Establishing labor systems that maintain control. We can actually see this visually. Foner uses maps of the Barrow Plantation in Georgia.
Ah, okay. What do they show?
Well, the 1860 map shows slave quarters all clustered together near the owner's house, easy surveillance, communal living under control. But the 1881 map, it shows scattered sharecropper cabins.
Spread out.
Yeah, spread out across the land with their own church, their own school nearby. It shows freed people carving out physical and social distance, demanding independence, even within the limits of the new system.
A visual representation of that push for autonomy.
Definitely. Now, compare that to the Northern Republican vision.
The victors. What was their idea?
The free labor ideal. They genuinely believed that emancipated slaves would work harder and more productively as free laborers, that Northern money and know-how would flow south and remake the South in the North's image.
You know, public schools, small farms, A free society.
That was the hope. And the main instrument for this was the Freedmen's Bureau.
Right, set up in March 1865. O.O. Howard was in charge.
Yep. And its job was immense. Setting up schools, providing aid, settling arguments between black and white, ensuring fair treatment in courts.
But it was massively under-resourced, wasn't it?
Critically, fewer than 1,000 agents for the whole South. But despite that, they achieved remarkable things, especially in education, almost 3,000 schools by 1869, and healthcare, too.
Foner mentions a Winslow Homer painting, A Visit from the Old Mistress.
Yes, from 1876. It shows a former mistress visiting her former slaves.
The body language is fascinating. You see the awkwardness, the tension, the shift in power dynamics. Even if old habits are still there, it captures that uneasy transition.
But the Bureau couldn't deliver on everything. What about land?
That was the major failure. Land reform stalled. President Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, ordered most confiscated land back to its former Confederate owners.
So the land Sherman had set aside, the Sherman land,
Gone, returned. This caused huge disbelief and protest among the freedmen who'd settled there. They saw land as absolutely essential to the meaning of freedom. Without it, what had really changed?
so no 40 acres and a mule. What system emerged instead? This is where sharecropping and the crop lien system come in. It was sort of a compromise. Black families could rent land, work it themselves, and pay the owner with a share of the crop.
More autonomy than gang labor, I suppose.
A bit more, yes. But it quickly became exploitative. Cotton prices fell after the war. Landowners charged sky-high interest rates for supplies.
So, debt.
Endless debt. Foner gives the example of Matt Brown, a Mississippi farmer. Even when he produced a decent cotton crop, his debt just kept growing year after year because of the cost of supplies bought on credit. He died still in debt.
And this trapped white farmers too, right?
Increasingly, yes. Small white farmers also got caught in the cropland system. For them, it felt like a loss of freedom, falling into dependency. There was a map Foner references, sharecropping in the South, 1880, and it just shows this system dominating the cotton and tobacco regions. It was widespread.
Still, despite these economic problems, Foner points out something unique about the U.S., doesn't he?
He does. Only in the U.S. were former slaves given the right to vote so quickly within just 2 years, which leads us straight into the political firestorm.
Right. This is where it gets really intense, isn't it? The political battle over how to rebuild a nation.
Absolutely. And it starts with presidential Reconstruction under Andrew Johnson from 65 to 67.
Johnson. He wasn't Lincoln. Different background, different views.
Totally different. A tailor from North Carolina, championed poor whites, hated the planter class, strong unionist, but also deeply racist. Foner says he was unsuited for the responsibilities he faced, stubborn, unwilling to compromise.
And he believed black people had no role in Reconstruction.
None whatsoever. His plan, rolled out in May 65, was lenient towards the South. Pardons for most white Southerners, new state governments elected only by whites.
So basically, let the white South handle it, as long as they abolish slavery and renounce secession.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the result, these new governments brought former Confederates right back into power, and then they passed the Black Codes.
The infamous Black Codes. What exactly did they do?
They were designed to control black labor and recreate conditions as close to slavery as possible. They granted some rights marriage, limited property ownership, but denied crucial ones.
Like testifying against whites, serving on juries, voting.
All denied. And crucially, they forced freedmen into yearly labor contracts. If you didn't have one, you could be arrested for vagrancy and hired out to a white landowner.
So forced labor, essentially. Foner describes an image, selling a freedman to pay his fine.
Yes, it's chilling. Shows a black man on an auction block being sold off. It perfectly captures how the codes tried to maintain racial hierarchy and economic control.
This must have outraged Republicans in the North.
It absolutely did. It violated everything they thought the war was fought for, those free labor principles. It pushed many moderate Republicans towards the radicals.
Okay, tell us about the radical Republicans, figures like Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens.
Right. They were pushing for much more fundamental change. They wanted to dissolve Johnson's governments, keep former Confederates out of power, and guarantee black men the right to vote.
Stevens even wanted to confiscate planter land, didn't he?
He did. Redistribute it to former slaves. But that was too radical even for many Republicans. Still, their influence grew rapidly because of Johnson's actions and the Black Codes.
So Congress takes charge.
Yes. They refused to seat the representatives elected under Johnson's plan. Then, in 1866, They passed the Civil Rights Bill of 1866.
A landmark bill.
Huge. It defined everyone born in the U.S. as a citizen, regardless of race, and spelled out basic rights, making contracts, suing, owning property protected by the federal government.
But Johnson vetoed it.
He did, argued it gave too much power to the federal government, violated states' rights, and claimed blacks didn't deserve citizenship.
But Congress overrode the veto.
They did. First time in U.S. history, a major bill became law over a presidential veto. A massive showdown.
And this led directly to the 14th Amendment.
Exactly. To embed these principles in the Constitution itself. Ratified in 1868, the 14th Amendment is arguably the most important change to the Constitution other than the Bill of Rights.
What did it do, fundamentally?
It established birthright citizenship. It declared that states could not abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens or deny anyone equal protection of the laws. This fundamentally shifted power, making the federal government the ultimate guarantor of citizens' rights. Foner calls it a great constitutional revolution.
Making the federal government the custodian of freedom.
Precisely. It redefined federalism and the very meaning of American freedom.
Did it grant black men the vote directly?
Not explicitly. That was a compromise. Instead, it said if a state denied suffrage to any group of adult men, its representation in Congress would be reduced proportionally.
Clever. Forcing the South's hand. Allow black voting or lose power.
That was the idea. Johnson fought the amendment furiously, and violent riots against black people in Memphis and New Orleans further damaged his standing.
Which pushed Congress even further.
Yes, leading to the Reconstruction Act of 1867, passed over another Johnson veto.
What did that do?
It essentially wiped the slate clean, divided the South into 5 military districts, required new state constitutions to be written, and this was key, mandated that black men be allowed to vote in the elections for the conventions to write those constitutions.
So this is the start of radical Reconstruction. Military oversight, black suffrage mandated.
That's it. The federal government taking direct control to reshape Southern society.
And the conflict with Johnson wasn't over yet, right? Impeachment.
Right. Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act to prevent Johnson from firing cabinet members.
Right.
He defied it, fired Secretary of War Stanton, and the House impeached him in 1868.
But he was acquitted.
By one single vote in the Senate. He finished his term, but politically crippled. Then came the 1868 election.
Ulysses S. Grant wins.
Yep. Though the margin was closer than expected, Grant's victory, however, helped push through the final major piece of Reconstruction legislation.
The 15th Amendment.
Ratified in 1870. Simple but profound. Prohibited federal and state governments from denying the right to vote based on race. William Lloyd Garrison called it a wonderful, quiet, sudden transformation.
So a constitutional revolution securing citizenship and voting rights, at least on paper.
On paper, yes. But even as this happened, the limits were becoming clear, especially for women.
How so?
Well, women's rights leaders like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony hoped Reconstruction would be their moment too. But the focus remains squarely on black men.
And the amendments actually introduced gendered language.
For the first time, yes. The 14th Amendment explicitly refers to male inhabitants when discussing voting rights representation. And the 15th Amendment prohibited denial of suffrage based on race, but not gender. This split the women's movement.
And the courts reinforced this.
They did. Foner mentions the Myra Bradwell case in 1873. She was denied the right to practice law in Illinois simply because she was a woman. The Supreme Court upheld the denial, stating that the domestic sphere was the proper domain for women, not the professions. Free labor principles apparently didn't apply to them.
So even amidst radical change, traditional ideas about gender held firm.
Very much so.
Okay, so we have these new laws, new amendments, black men voting. What did this actually look like on the ground in the South, this period of interracial democracy?
It was truly unprecedented. You see this incredible outburst of political organization among African Americans, joining groups like the Union League, registering to vote in huge numbers. It was electric.
Foner quotes a former slave, James K. Green.
Yeah, saying when the tocsin of freedom sounded, they walked out like free men and shouldered the responsibilities. A real sense of empowerment.
And this translated into actual political power.
Absolutely. Around 2,000 black men held public office during Reconstruction. Local, state, federal level. A radical departure, Foner calls it. Think about it. 14 black men elected to the U.S. House, 2 to the Senate from Mississippi.
Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce.
Exactly. Revels was the first black senator, taking Jefferson Davis's old seat in 1870. There's a famous lithograph from the plantation to the Senate celebrating this arc, showing black leaders literally moving from the fields to the halls of Congress.
Did these office holders make a tangible difference?
They did. Along with their white allies, they worked for fairer court systems, better local services. Many were former slaves who had already established leadership roles, maybe in the church or the army. They brought lived experience to governance.
And the new state governments they helped form, what did they achieve?
They drafted new state constitutions in 1868 and 69. These were the most progressive the South had ever seen. They established, for the first time, state-funded public school systems for both races, though usually segregated.
And other institutions.
Yes, like hospitals, penitentiaries, orphanages. They guaranteed basic civil and political rights and got rid of antebellum relics like whipping as a punishment or needing property to hold office.
Who are the white allies in these governments?
Mm-hmm.
We hear terms like carpetbagger and scalawag.
Right, those were derogatory terms used by opponents. Carpetbaggers were supposedly opportunistic Northerners who came south after the war with all their belongings in a carpet bag, looking to profit. Many were actually Union veterans who stayed, or investors, teachers, reformers.
And scalawags.
Those were native-born white Southerners who joined the Republicans, often non-slaveholding farmers, wartime Unionists, seen as traitors by the old Confederate elite.
So a coalition government, essentially. What about the economy? Did they manage to rebuild the South?
That was the hope. They pinned a lot of faith on railroad construction to attract northern investment and spur growth. But overall, economic development was pretty weak. Corruption and railroad financing didn't help either. Most African Americans, sadly, remained locked in poverty despite the political gains.
Which brings us to the difficult part. The unraveling. Why didn't this interracial democracy last? What led to the retreat from Reconstruction in the 1870s?
Well, the opposition was fierce from the start. The old Southern leadership, the planters, merchants, Democrats, they simply could not accept black people as equals, as voters, as office holders. That was the bedrock of the opposition.
Was corruption a factor? Opponents always claimed these governments were corrupt.
There certainly was corruption, yes, but it wasn't unique to Reconstruction governments or to black officials. You had massive scandals in the North, too, like the whiskey ring involving Grant's own administration. But opponents used corruption and also rising taxes needed for those new schools and services as potent weapons against the Republican governments.
And the opposition wasn't just political, it was violent.
Extremely violent. This is where the secret societies come in, most famously the Ku Klux Klan, founded in Tennessee in 1866.
What was the Klan's goal?
To be the military arm of the Democratic Party, as Foner puts it, to overthrow Reconstruction governments through terror. They targeted Republican leaders, black and white, teachers, landowners, anyone who challenged white supremacy. Lynchings, beatings, burnings. It was brutal.
Foner mentions the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana in 1873.
A horrific event. Hundreds of black men killed after surrendering. It exemplifies the scale of the violence. There's a cartoon where it includes a perspective scene in the city of Oaks, which was a direct Klan threat, showing a noose and a coffin meant for white Republican leaders.
Did the federal government try to stop this?
It did initially. Congress passed the Enforcement Acts in 1870 and 71, these outlawed terrorist groups, and allowed President Grant to use the army against them.
And did Grant use that power?
Yes, he did. He sent troops into South Carolina and other areas, arrested hundreds of Klansmen. By 1872, the Klan was largely suppressed, and there was a period of relative calm.
But the Northern will to continue this intervention started to fade.
It did. A kind of Reconstruction fatigue set in. Many Northerners felt the South should sort out its own problems now, that black people should rely on themselves, not constant federal help. You can even see this shift in Thomas Nast's political cartoons. He went from championing black rights to sometimes portraying Southern black politicians negatively.
And there was a political shift within the Republican Party, too.
Yes, the liberal Republicans emerged in 1872. They were unhappy with Grant's administration, particularly the corruption scandals. They wanted less federal intervention in the South, reconciliation with former Confederates. They nominated Horace Greeley for president.
He lost to Grant, though.
Overwhelmingly. But the movement signaled weakening Republican resolve. Then came a major blow, the economic depression of 1873.
How did that impact Reconstruction?
It shifted national attention away from the South entirely. Economic crisis dominated politics. Republicans lost control of the House of Representatives in 1874 for the first time since the Civil War. The focus was just elsewhere.
So even the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which banned discrimination in public places,
Was kind of the last gasp, a significant law, but passed when the tide was already turning against federal enforcement.
And the Supreme Court played a role in this retreat, too.
A crucial one. In the Slaughterhouse cases, 1873, the court interpreted the 14th Amendment very narrowly. It said most rights remained under state control, limiting the amendment's power to protect against state abuses.
Undermining the custodian of freedom idea.
Precisely. And then in United States v. Cruikshank, 1876, related to the Colfax Massacre, the court essentially gutted the enforcement acts. It ruled that the 14th Amendment only protected rights from state action, not from individuals like the Klan. It made prosecuting racist violence incredibly difficult.
So the legal framework was weakening. What was happening in the South politically?
The Democrats, calling themselves redeemers, were steadily regaining control state by state. They used violence, intimidation, fraud, whatever it took. In Mississippi in 1875, they used open violence to keep black voters from the polls, and the federal government didn't intervene. Same thing in South Carolina in 1876 under Wade Hampton.
Which leads us to the final nail in the coffin, the election of 1876.
The disputed election, Republican Rutherford B. Hayes versus Democrat Samuel J. Tilden. The results were incredibly close and hinged on contested returns from 3 southern states still under Republican control: Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina.
Chaos. How was it resolved?
Through the bargain of 1877, Congress created a special electoral commission which narrowly voted along party lines to give all the disputed electoral votes, and thus the presidency, to Hayes.
But there was a deal behind the scenes.
Yes. Hayes's allies essentially promised Democrats that if they accepted the result, Hayes would recognize Democratic control of the remaining southern states and, crucially, withdraw the last federal troops.
So, the end of federal protection for black rights in the South.
That was the practical effect. Democrats, in return, promised to respect black rights. But, well, that promise wasn't kept for long. Hayes ordered the troops out of the state houses in Louisiana and South Carolina shortly after taking office.
And just like that, Reconstruction as an era of federal intervention and black political participation was over.
By 1877, yes, the Redeemers were in control across the South, and the federal government had stepped back.
Wow, what a journey. From the highest ideals of freedom and equality enshrined in new amendments to the harsh realities of violence and political compromise. We've covered so much: the competing ideas of freedom, the Freedmen's Bureau, the Black Codes, the huge impact of the 14th and 15th Amendments, the rise of black political power, and then the KKK, the waning Northern will, and finally, the bargain of 1877.
It's a complex and often tragic story, but it's crucial to remember, as Foner emphasizes, that even though Reconstruction was ultimately overthrown, it wasn't a complete failure. It permanently altered the Constitution and the definition of American citizenship. It laid the legal and ideological groundwork for the civil rights movement a century later, what some call the Second Reconstruction.
That's a powerful point. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How different would American history be if that initial vision of Reconstruction, that interracial democracy, had actually been sustained? What lessons are there for us today about protecting civil rights, about the federal role, about the persistence needed in the face of backlash?
Those are exactly the questions this history forces us to ask.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a truly transformative period. We hope it's given you a clearer picture of Reconstruction and maybe sparked some further thinking.
Thanks for listening.